All right, listeners, it's Ryan and Megan, and welcome to the Mental Health Mixtape, a podcast dedicated to fostering open conversations, sharing stories, and exploring a diverse range of topics related to mental health. So hold on to your seats as we sit down with some amazing guests to get their perspectives on the ever-changing landscape of mental health. And for all you old folks, no need to hit the record and pause button. Just sit back and let us navigate life's playlist together. During this podcast, you may hear stories about traumatic events and our guests' experiences. There may be discussions about suicide, traumatic events, and the outcomes from these events on personal lives. If you're struggling with anything you hear, please reach out to your peer support team, psychologist, call 911, or head to the nearest hospital. In Canada, you could call Boots on the Ground Peer Support for First Responders at 1-833-677-2668. Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. And in the United States, call 988 for the National Crisis and Suicide Lifeline. It should be noted that the information shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical, psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Hey.
Hey.
From behind the mic boom.
Hey.
Hey, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. So just so our guests are aware, this is Jennifer Lessard. Is that correct?
Yep.
And she is an amazing human being that decided to come and wax poetic with Megan and I on the podcast here today. So we're grateful that you're able to show up, and we do apologize for all the scheduling nightmare that ended up occurring, but we are grateful that you're finally here.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here too.
So why don't you introduce yourself, tell us what you're here to really, what you want to talk about, and then we're going to just throw that one question at you and see how things go.
Oh, you threw me for a loop. See, I've listened to all the episodes, so I was anticipating the question right out of the gate.
I know.
Yeah, it's funny. When you say that I'm here, I was wondering if I'm the first guest to come here that doesn't have a relationship with either of you, because it seems like you've known one or both of you have known most of the guests.
That's a great question, and it might actually be true. Yeah,
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, well, the only other one who comes to mind is Mo, but I don't know if you knew Mo.
No, didn't know Mo that much.
So not the first,
but like you're in there for sure.
I'm the first to email and be like, "Hey, I have something to say."
Yeah, which I dig. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, fascinating. There's a number of people that are scheduled to be on in the next coming weeks, months, because this probably won't be out until the fall, if not close to the new year. But that are just people that just chose to fill out the form like yourself and just say, hey, I've got something to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's awesome. There was definitely a reason why I chose to press that button. So maybe I'll get to that after. You wanted an intro, right?
Sure. So. Whatever you want to say.
My name is Jennifer. I go by Jen. I have been a police officer with Calgary Police Service for just coming on to 22 years now. Nice. So I joined when I was very, very young. I started recruit class right after my 22nd birthday.
Oh, wow.
So it's really been my whole adult life. And as I mentioned just when we were off air, that the 5 years before that were in the military. So been serving in a uniform in one way or another since I was 16. So it's absolutely what I love and what I've always wanted to do. I've had lots of different kind of events that have happened in my life that have led me to being really passionate about mental health and mental wellness. And it kind of just all led to me being here in this chair. We had the pleasure of being introduced as an organization to the BOSS program.
Oh, wow. Hey.
About 2 years ago, we got like a service-wide email that said, here's the free program and we really encourage you to take it. And I had been an R2MR trainer, so I was really keen to see what other programs had to offer. And I loved the program. I connected to it really, really quickly. And there were lots of things that I wanted to take away from it and build out into some of my work areas. So then that's when I kind of became the internet stalker. I started following you both online and checking out how, what you guys were up to and what you were doing. And then when the mixtape started, I was a listener every week. Every time an episode came out, I was listening, and I was really drawn in by the conversations. You guys had such great guests who were passionate and experienced and really sharing a part of themselves. And I thought that was a dialogue that was not happening enough, the storytelling part, right? And I had done some of that through my career. My husband and I, in 2017, we did a Bell Let's Talk.
Oh, yeah.
On the Bell Let's Talk Day, we co-facilitated a session about what it was like to go through a wellness challenge. So the person that was impacted by it, but then also from the lens of the spouse supporting.
Right.
And so we facilitated that in our organization. But then the Mental Health Commission of Canada actually asked us to be part of some of their videos for the R2 More Family editions. So I had been in a space where, I was talking a little bit about some stories and pushing maybe into some uncomfortable spaces. And I felt like that's what was happening here is you were encouraging that. And so I was listening every week, and I was drawn into the conversations. And even though I was super passionate about the work, I was like, I don't really know if I have anything to contribute. I think everything that's being discussed is there. And so I kept listening and was like, just kind of, something was tugging at me, but I couldn't really place it. And I didn't feel like I had anything that could benefit or add the conversation. But then you had an episode with John Grilloni.
Oh, yes.
And not that long ago, really.
Yeah.
Well, when it aired anyways. But there was one point in the conversation where you were talking about the critical impact that direct supervisors have on the life and the well-being and the journey of people who are going through something. And at one point, Ryan, you said, I don't know exactly how it got there, but it went from there to the role that senior leaders play. I don't know if you recall it, but
I do.
It was a fairly negative opinion of senior leaders and their engagement or their role and or the lack of trust that exists there with leaders not being part of that.
Yep.
And for me, that was the moment that clicked, where I went,
here we go.
Where I went, well, it wasn't that the comment offended me, because it didn't. I think a lot of people have that experience, and I actually also have it as part of my journey. But I also knew that I was now in a place where I was the senior leader, and how much a tenet it was of how I lead to really try to care for the people that I'm around and that, are going through things. And it's something that had evolved over my career, but was a critical part of how I do business now. And I was like, that's the space I think I can lean into a little bit around the role that senior leaders have in this space, or some of the gaps, quite honestly, that still exist that we're not doing. And that in the end is what pushed me to put that
hit the send
button.
I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad you did. Thank you for that. Because I think from my perspective, I don't want to speak for you, but I mean, I believe that, we all come with a degree of experience or background or history, whatever. But nobody has the monopoly on this conversation. You know what I mean? Like, we've all got a piece that we're bringing to all the changes that need to continue to happen to support people in their wellness, right? So I hope you have some words for him, because I'd like to sit back and watch as we talk.
We'll get her some popcorn.
Yeah, that's right. But no, I just think it's really important to us that this is a very sort of equality-based space that we come into, where everybody's got a voice to share kind of their perspective on things. So thank you for reaching out. Yeah.
Thank you. And I mean, it's not that we need to do something better, because that implies we knew that what we were doing was worse. I think it's just something different. And I use that word, I've used it quite often this last little while. It's not that anybody in leadership positions do it out of malice, right? And that's what I find fascinating, and that's why I appreciate you coming. So, I mean, you took our thunder away from asking you the question. And I mean, the question really is why are you here today? And you just answered it all. So
there's more.
Is there?
Okay. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I think those are like the easy, obvious reasons of
what brought you here today. Yeah.
Specifically physically in the chair, but I mean, my journey with mental health and my passion for it. I think there are maybe a couple of pieces from my personal background that would probably help inform that. Is certainly would be one was the mother of my dad, the death of my mother. When I was 7. So I was really, really young, and I didn't know at the time what happened to her. I just knew that she was gone, and that was it, right? But when I was a little bit older, and as we know, the body usually
Keeps the score.
It usually tells you when something's wrong, and there were behavioral issues and medical issues and little things going on. And so by the time I was 11, my dad decided it was time for me to know the truth, and so he was able to tell me that she was actually murdered by her partner at the time.
Oh wow.
So quite a heavy load to take on at 11 and try to unpack how that could happen and how that's going to impact the rest of your life, because it certainly did, and it has, and it not long after that I knew I wanted to be a police officer. I knew I wanted to help victims and to try to intervene before things kind of went south. So I knew for a long time that I wanted to be a police officer. And then the more that I learned about, my mother's life and her upbringing and all the things that contributed, you start to get a rounder picture of what people are about and their mental health. So that was certainly a significant event. And then I would say that the second event that really, really impacted me was the death of one of my partners on the job. So once I was off field officer training, I was partnered with this really amazing man. He was, I was only 22. He was about 10 years older than me, and he had 2 beautiful little girls. And, I was out west here by myself, and we just really connected. He helped me in a lot of ways. He was a bit of a father figure, and he was just a great guy to be around. But a number of years after our partnership had ended, we were still good friends. But I learned that he had died by suicide. And so I knew that he had struggles throughout the years. I had been part of some of those critical moments when things were rough, and I didn't see it coming, as you often sometimes don't, maybe, or I was young and maybe I missed some things. But the point being, it just left such a lasting impact. Sure. And it's in hindsight now that I'm older, I can see that there are certain events that just changed what my passion and my focus was, from, serving the community and victims to wanting to be more engaged and more passionate about supporting the people that do that work and making sure that they're able to go out there and do that work. And I think that's really how my journey has evolved, around recognizing that that's what I'm more passionate about, is making sure that we're looking out for one another, and we're taking care of each other, because the job of taking care of others is so complicated and so hard in first responder work, that you need people, I think, like us in the background who are willing to help those doing that job.
When you talked about your mom, I was just sitting here thinking, like, even finding out at 11, I'm curious to know what it was like for you to find out when you were 11, like how you integrated that. So I found myself wondering, who kind of came to be a support for you, and what was that like? And then immediately I went to think, I wonder what it was like for those folks who turned up to the scene of your mother's murder and, tried to find justice for her and your family, and, what that's, because in the people that I talk to, those are oftentimes the scenes that stand out. Those are oftentimes I was actually just talking to a law enforcement officer this morning who just had to do some next to kin stuff, like it sticks with people. So you, and then how it fits into this context of the work that you do.
Yeah, and I think now that you've framed it that way, it's maybe making some connections that I quite hadn't made to the area that I'm supervising right now, which is crime scenes. So a lot of trauma there, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for me at 11, learning that was it's so hard to think back to what you did with it, because it was so complicated. Like I didn't live in an environment where I knew that people hurt each other in that way, like loved ones hurt each other in that way. And why didn't I know about it till now kind of comes up. And, my mother had been living in Quebec at the time, and we were living with my father in Ontario. And it's the pieces of, what if I had been with her at the time?
Right,
would the outcome have been different? Would the conflict not have escalated to that point, right? Those kinds of things. And you start to deal with it. But I was lucky. I think it took me a few years, probably till about I was 14 or 15, right before I joined the military, that it was, you can choose to go down this path and have this be a destructive force in your life that kind of really leads you into bad decisions and bad situations, or you can turn it around and turn it into something that you can grow from and something that you can gain experience from. And for me, that was forgiveness, to just move on from it and know that I had to live a life, and I, was in control of making that what I wanted it to be. So at that time, sort of naively at this point, it was, let's focus on victims and let's help victims of domestic violence. And for a long time, that was my single-minded focus of doing that. And then, of course, you grow from that and, you grow beyond that. But
I wonder, and you might have something to say on this too, like I see that as a really positive or healthy adaptation to trauma, right? Like this horrible life-altering, shattering thing has happened in your life. First, your mother dying, but then you learn how she died. And then what you did with that was you changed it into, well, I'm going to try to help other victims so that perhaps they don't experience the same thing. Like because I agree. I think there's those turning points where you can end up going very, very in very different directions, and sometimes pretty self-destructive directions, or oftentimes you find ways to shift that into giving back to others or helping others in some kind of way. Does it feel like that for you?
I think it did for a long time. I think, again, with the wisdom of age comes some clarity. And you mentioned The Body Keeps the Score. I've read that book. So I do think, this leads into some bigger issues around some of the work that I think as a first responder community, we need to do around ACE scores and understanding why people with, higher than average ACE scores are drawn to the first responder field. And then how that also makes us, and then how that also then makes us more susceptible to trauma injuries, right? Yeah. So I think there's so for me, it was that a healthy way of processing it? Yes, sure. But I think I buried parts of it or didn't process some of it that have now in later life have come through the body and are coming through that way. So I think it's a journey. You do what you can with the tools that you have.
And I think it's just fascinating. Actually, at 15, 14, you created purpose and intention, right? Because that's a skill that not many people, from my perspective or for myself, actually understand to the level of what you did, whether you did it intentionally or not. And just so everybody listening and online knows, ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Events. But going back to that purpose and intention, like Megan said, you could have gone way one way or way the other. But when you take a look at what you experienced and made a choice, like a conscious decision, that is pretty powerful at such a young age.
And I guess I just to tack onto that, I really have this belief, and it's been informed by my own personal experiences, the research I did in grad school, my clinical work since the last 24 years. You're not going to find, in my opinion, anybody who's doing something really passionately and really meaningfully and in a way that is contributing to the common good who hasn't come from a place of pain, right? They kind of go hand in hand, in my opinion, at least.
No, I would agree.
And I think that sounds like you, is I guess what I'm reflecting.
Yeah. And I mean, I think our experience would probably tell us that that's a lot of people. When you get down to it, there's been something in there that's kind of pushed them in that direction. So I mean, of course, certainly that is what impacted me to kind of go in this direction.
Yeah. And so I go sometimes philosophically, I think then is pain or trauma or adversity a necessary component to help us grow and develop and become who we're supposed to be?
Yeah, I think it can. And I mean, from my perspective, I certainly think that some of the things that I've talked about, that I've experienced, and then some that we quite haven't gotten to yet, have led to that deeper understanding of compassion and empathy and holding space for other people's, their version of their story and how it's impacted them and recognizing that everybody's journey, everybody's pain, everybody's process through that is a little different. And we have to be able to acknowledge that, because to assume that, all first responders are going to respond to trauma in this cookie cutter way is just not realistic. Yeah. And sometimes the systems that are created hinder us in being able to really support people how they need it.
Completely.
One of my favorite quotes is by Eugene Cash. It says, "Pain is inevitable, but degrees of suffering are optional." And coupled with that and some of the mindfulness practices and the things that I've learned is, pain plus reflection equals growth, but pain times resistance equals suffering. And I mean, I really try and look at those in a way that when we resist, we don't have the opportunity to reflect. Therefore, we increase our suffering and don't grow. So going back to your question, I think we do need to, in some way, shape, or form, experience that. How do we then experience it so we can reflect on it? And we're not resisting it? Because I think from a first responder lens, we resist the emotion side of what we do. I think we have to do it in some aspects, but we don't know how to go back and revisit that. And that's a skill that you can learn. And I think started my training in 99. I don't think I figured that out until about 8 years ago. Right?
Yeah. And I would say, connecting it back to the second part of your question around the first responders that went to the scene, for the last 4 years, that's one of my teams, are the folks that, not the first responders, but they're the ones even doing the more difficult work of, doing the things that crime scene folks do, right?
Yeah.
And what I have seen is the layering of trauma, of unprocessed trauma, right?
Yeah.
Because they're doing their job and they're going call to call to call, and they'll deal with it later and they'll deal with it. But the later kind of never comes, and the processing never happens. And then what you see is the pain and suffering at a much later time when the problems have been compounded and, the issues are way more difficult to resolve versus the ongoing processing of trauma as you're going throughout your career versus dealing it when, you can't sleep and like all of your, your marriage is falling apart and all these things are happening versus dealing with it before. And I think there are lots of barriers to why that's difficult in our kind of line of work as to why we're not coming forward and dealing with some of those things. But I definitely think that that's in the space we need to be.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts then? Because, I mean, preach, like I could listen to you talk all day and I completely agree with you. And yet, I still observe that, I still think we bump up against people's old attitudes about mental wellness in law enforcement or other public safety sectors. I think we still have tropes out there around what it means to be, a capable, competent, tough police officer. I still see that it's typically a crisis that's bringing someone in to get help. So what do you think? Like, in your career and your experience, where are we on the continuum of change?
I mean, I feel like we're certainly further along the continuum than where we were when I started 20 years ago. But are we where I think we should be? Probably not. I think we kind of get in the way ourselves of progress, intentionally or not. I take that to heart. I think a lot of leaders especially are not intentionally going out there and trying to harm members or create practices that are harmful. But I think what we shy away from is that's not the point. Your intention or our intention as an organization or as leaders isn't the point. The point is to acknowledge that trauma is happening, either be it from the actual calls or organizational trauma or, sanctuary trauma, things like that. Those things are happening and it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to admit it. And rather than point fingers or try to measure, is your trauma actually as bad as you say that it is? Or, like this one person over here went through the same thing and they reacted much better. Like all of this measuring that's not how the conversation should be framed. Like when we're talking about trauma, we should be in a space where we can acknowledge that it's happening and just simply acknowledge that it's impacted somebody to the point where it's had such impairment that it's impacting their lives. Period. Like, that's it. Like, and then the question that I really try to focus on is what healing needs to take place. Yeah. And just kind of frame it around, it's real. It's impacted somebody to the point that they're not who they were. Yeah. And what healing can we do, either as individuals or as organizations? Because I do think a lot of people are feeling isolated when they're feeling like they've gone through some trauma, whatever kind of trauma it is. They feel like they're really isolated, that nobody understands them, and that they'll be judged, right, if they come forward, or that they did something wrong. They weren't resilient enough. They weren't tough enough. They didn't, well, you should have known what you were getting into in this line of work. All of those things that people say. And I think what's missing is the organizational responsibility to manage the psychological safety and the well-being of people in our care and what that framework actually looks like, and not shy away from it. It's part of our job as leaders to do what you can to minimize it. Can I always, protect a member from going into a crime scene where there are dead children? No. But what are the things within my control around that? What are the other things? What are the things around, unmanageable workloads and conflict in the workplace that I can deal with that add to that person's burden? Things like that. And just really being honest about not shying away from the responsibility that we have.
I hear that, right? I don't think our job is to try to insulate or protect people from exposure. I don't think that's possible. Like, again, if any of us are driven to serve, which I know the three of us are, like, that you can't control how that looks. So maybe this ties into the conversation around leadership. I mean, we've been doing some work on developing some leadership curriculum, and after maybe working in the sector or the industry to get people to talk about the fact that, like, trauma is real, it's legitimate, it's not an individual's failing or lack of competency, it's just a reality of public safety work, and so therefore let's normalize, and then let's normalize how to take care of people and individuals. For me, the next logical place to go is into leadership and into organizations and go, okay, what is happening in the ecosystem, to think about how are people then being supported, right? If we're acknowledging that trauma and trauma impacting individuals is a reality, then what are we doing again around them to try to support? And from my perspective, the last few years, there's been a lot of criticism, maybe is the word, of organizations and of individual leaders. And it's like this conversation where on the one hand, we acknowledge that people are probably doing to some extent what was done to them. Probably people are being well-intentioned. Most people aren't behaving in a way that because they want to hurt other people, right? And so I just feel like there's pieces of the leadership conversation that are still missing. It's not enough to say, oh, well, it's leadership's fault. And I don't mean to sort of categorize it like that. But there's parts about how do we see the human in the leaders too that I feel like needs to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It's the same thing as we promote from within. Think about the people that are in leadership positions in a variety of different front-facing organizations that have been promoted from the street, probably early 2000s or late 1990s, when stigma was rife. You didn't talk about it. You don't, just that. And what burden are they carrying into their leadership roles? Again, it's not about doing something better because they didn't know any better or they didn't know anything different. What can we do to help educate that?
And what do we? I have a good friend who's a CPS officer and a leader, and I see her and what she tries to accomplish, and there's nobody out there who's more well-intentioned or fuller of heart and spirit and care and whatever, and there's just old attitudes, old practices, bureaucratic organizational hurdles that she can't over. You know what I mean? Like there's some legit things in there too. So yeah, do you have any thoughts?
I think I know who you're talking about.
Oh, yeah?
I won't say the name, but she's amazing.
She's amazing. Yeah, she's the best.
And you're right.
You know who you are.
Because you've done a lot of work. You sent me some of the stuff you wanted to talk about today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I read through it. And it's amazing.
It was intimidating sending it to both of you, I'll have to admit.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, this is your work. This is
Right.
what you guys are, qualified in. I'm just a leader who's passionate and trying to come up with ideas.
Take the just out.
Yeah,
You're not just a
totally.
leader.
But
The framework from what that was built on is amazing.
Totally.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
really enjoyed
thank
reading
you.
it. Thank you for sending it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's certainly a piece of work that I'm passionate about and I cared about. And was a little bit of an individual effort in the sense of really wanting to set up that framework and push. Because, I mean, I'm sure you both know many people in our psych services, and they're so busy, right? And they have so many balls that they're trying to juggle. So it was a little bit of an approach of, we need to do more than just put on a website that services are available and here are the numbers that you can call. Like, I was certainly feeling like this work area in particular had layers of, the operational trauma that they were experiencing on their calls, but also the organizational trauma that there wasn't just a lot going on around there, right? And if the leader's not engaged in trying to unpack that and figure it out, and I just really felt like they were a unit in particular that needed to be seen and heard, which we say all the time, but for them it was more about they needed to be cared for. And they just hadn't been getting that for what they had gone through. And so it was trying to come up with a way to hear them, to see them, and to find out what care looked like for them. And so it was a very detailed way of trying to get to that. And I've been there for now 4 years, and I do think there have been some positive changes, and some, some independent reporting of feeling safer in the workplace. And, we have had a significant rate of turnover, but for me, that is a little bit of a success, because the turnover, most of them left because they took care of themselves.
Right.
And they saw how injured they were, and they advocated for themselves to create boundaries and self-care and strategies that put their health first. And so it was hard operationally as a leader to try to, meet your mandate and meet your objectives. But taking care of these people was really priority number one.
So can you expand on that a little bit? Because I'm fascinated by that. I think sometimes we use terms and we assume that everyone uses them the same way. So like, what have you learned about what care actually looks like?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because, I was initially describing as like, oh, they needed strong leadership in this unit, but that's not what they needed. They needed care, and it did look different. And as an example, I think sometimes it comes down to identifying what those specific group of people need, because sometimes, like, a BOSS program is great as a foundational piece, and then you need to build on that for what specific people need, right? Yeah. And so for me, it started out with listening, like truly listening with the intent of nothing, just to listen to what was hurting them, like as a collective, as individuals, what was going on. Before I was there, they had in over the span of a decade, they had over 13 leaders transition in and out of that work area. So every year and a half, they had different leaders, and as
different
I'm sure,
expectations, different.
So it's so complicated, and I think we underestimate the impact that can have on workers and organizations that have lots of, transient positions like that. And you could tell they had gone through just the trauma of having bosses who step in and out and change the rules and change the expectations and change how they interact with people, like a lot of adjustments for them to make. Some people, who came in with different things, and there were just a lot going on there. And it was a living, breathing thing. You could just feel it in the unit, that there were things around a lack of trust in leadership and things like that, right? But then it was just listening to what they needed and what they were having issues with. So really what came out through the first most was trust. So it was really 18 months of just building trust. So that was foundational. But the most important thing is they weren't sleeping. And we know that is huge to everything else. Totally. It's foundational. So the first thing was building trust, and dealing with sleep was protecting them from the level that I had around ensuring that their sleep, their downtime was their downtime. Right. Because the expectation of call out is something that is really difficult. And we've struggled as an organization to figure out what that looks like, to balance, the organizational needs and then individual needs around it. But I was able to do that for them for a while. And I think that takes just a lot of pressure off. And then you can start to notice, hey, I've got weird pain, or hey, I'm having nightmares, or like all of the things that start to pop up when you're not, just really kind of
on the go.
Yeah.
Not switched off. Have you ever read the book by Dr. Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep?
No.
I highly recommend it.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, I think sleep in general for most trauma-exposed professionals is a struggle. And the more we don't sleep because of call-outs over time, whatever that case may be, we know that's where repair happens, that we know that's where processing of our events during the day happens, in that deep sleep and REM sleep. And I think for years, I've been one of the fortunate ones that I never really had sleep disturbances, but almost everybody I knew on the job was getting 2 to 3 hours, maybe 4 or 5 max. And that's not conducive to actually helping you process your events. Yeah. No matter what role you play.
Yeah.
So I applaud that. That's the first step.
Yeah.
That was your trust, then sleep.
Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting from my perspective that you built up trust simply by listening to people.
Well, I don't know if it was that easy.
No, but you know what I mean? And we're coming as we work on sort of refinements of the BOSS program, as we build up the leadership curriculum, like this is what I come back to time and again. It's like we don't, maybe, technology enabled solutions and this thing and that thing, like maybe these are the panaceas or whatever, but it's remarkable to me how much people's well-being boils down to, can you just be a human being with me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you be present to my emotions as I have them without feeling like you are pressured to fix them? Can you try to understand my experience? Like it's amazing how much it boils down to that level of connection.
Yeah. And like I would say two things to add to that. I think for this particular group, as I talked about, specific solutions, is for a number of people whose job it is to go out and look at dead bodies, essentially, to come forward and say, I'm having trouble seeing dead bodies. It was almost like a death sentence to them, because their whole purpose of why they came to the area, and then it's a tenure of 10 years, right? They come expecting to stay 10 years. And then, partway through, they start to understand that they're having issues and they don't want to come forward because they're afraid they're going to be outed of the unit. So I think part of that trust building was being able to say, you're having trouble? Cool. You still have a job here.
Right.
Like, go take your time off. Your position is held.
Yeah.
In some cases, we held positions for 2 years for people to go get the help that they needed and then figure out if coming back was right for them or not. But it wasn't an equal, if you admit that you need help with this, that you automatically can't do your job anymore.
Totally.
And that, I think, was a game changer in the sense of, I think that certainly accelerated the rate of people that left the unit or went off, because one time we had about 46% of the unit off or not working.
Well, which is so interesting, because you could look at that and go, oh my gosh, but actually that's if you look at it another way, that's a positive sign, because it means that people are actually seeking the help that they need.
Yeah. That was the same thing that happened when we run in a stigma reduction program. We all of a sudden had an uptick in people raising their hand and saying, I need help. And they're not going to get punished for raising your hand because this is what we trained you in. And now all of a sudden we've got uptick and more off and more overtime. And I look at that as a huge success, actually.
Yeah. And then I think the other part that helped with the trust building was the piece about humanizing officers and maybe senior leaders was I came to it with my own humility around sharing my struggles, because there was there's this perception that, if you're successful enough to make it up to those senior ranks, that you must have your shit tight, right? Like you must be good to go and things are going well and all those kinds of things, right? And then sometimes we perpetuate that by not sharing, by trying to be, that old vintage of be the leader and be tough, right? Like all that stuff. And that's not how I came to that unit in particular. Just because of where I was personally in life. So I shared a lot about my own struggles and where I was. And I think that helped as well. Yeah,
I think it does. I mean, it's, I don't know if you relate to this or not. So that's one of the things I think about with leadership, because though it wasn't by design, I have this leadership role that I've kind of taken on over the years just by virtue of being in the industry for as long. And so, I feel that pressure of you're supposed to be a way, or the ways in which people relate to you externally without really knowing who you are, what you're about, right? So I had a really hard therapy session this morning, my own therapy, where my therapist was like, oh, but you're so successful, you've got this. I'm like, yeah, but you have to understand, that's paired against an internal narrative of being a fuck up, right? And so human beings, we are constantly trying to, right? Just negotiate these things. And I feel that pressure of, whether it's rank, title, uniform, years of service, whatever it is, that you're somehow supposed to not have those things after a certain amount of time. And in fact, I think in some ways they get even more raw, as you challenge yourself, you push yourself more. So a roundabout way of saying, I think that's what we're called to do actually as effective leaders, is be willing to be vulnerable. And oftentimes that means being willing to share. So I'm a fuck up. My name's Megan.
She's not a fuck up. She's vulnerable. I wholeheartedly agree. I think there needs to be a shift in all levels, really, from the base foundation, first starting on the job, to, hey, it's okay. And this is that phrase that you hear all the time, to not be okay. But how do we then move that into the space of acceptance from an organization that has competing priorities from an operational standpoint.
Yeah, like organizational policies and practices
Right.
that support that, because
So we
otherwise
need
it's a
to
bumper
align
sticker.
those. Yeah, we need to align the organizational operational policies to support the people when they do raise their hand. And there's been strides over the span of the last 20 some odd years that I've been involved in first responders, but I think there's a lot that we can do. And I think it comes down to what I see is the little pockets, units like yours or other leaders that choose a different path to be, hey, you know what, I've struggled too, and it's okay. One of the biggest things, as you talked about technology, is having an office with an open door and saying, hey, I'm available, and then not trying to fix anything. Having people just be able to come in and close the door and say, I need to talk. From a leader standpoint, get it, competing priorities, but there's always some space. I think that kind of personal, that space, that personal area, whatever that looks like, can be facilitated. You just need to figure it out in your own way. But I think it's necessary.
Like, I think there's something for me about, and I don't know what you two think about this, about, like, I don't want to ask anyone to do anything that I'm not prepared to do myself, right?
Yeah.
And, like, obviously that can mean, like, the practical, operational things, but I also think that means the vulnerable stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can and I feel this as a therapist too, like, if I'm not prepared to try to be honest with myself, how can I possibly ask people to try to be honest with themselves, you know? So there's something in this emotional, social connectedness realm that I think is important for people. If other people are turning to you or looking to you as an example or as a model of something, you know, are you expecting of yourself the same things that maybe you're hoping for or expecting from them?
Yeah. Yes, to all that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Because I think that's important, right? Like, if you are not willing to, act in nonverbal, actions, not words. If you're not willing to share, why would you expect somebody else to share with you? Because we know from trauma and our experiences, we tend to isolate. That's just what we do. But what we need to do is actually connect, right? That connection, that tribe, that community. So how do we foster that within units or within the leadership side to say, hey, I'm part of this community, even though I sit in here, my job is to protect you from the other pieces of the system, for lack of a better term. How can we create that space so that you don't feel like you need to isolate, like you can't share?
Yeah. And I think, so that's some of where I'm in the space now. So taking some of the terminology and the concepts that came out of BOSS that I really want to move into implementation, because now I have a unit of 50% new people, right? So they're at the start of their journey, and they're like the young recruits, right? They're like gung-ho, and they think nothing's going to impact them, and they don't understand the cumulative effects yet, right? And they don't see it. So it's really about trying to focus on that early intervention and support to reinforce those concepts about unpacking the trauma that can happen, right? So, and coming back to that responsibility of the senior leadership to recognize that we have a role to play in this. We have a job, right? So even though there are different teams and they're led by their immediate direct supervisors whose job it is to be that soft landing place, right?
Yeah.
Still putting those parameters and expectations on those leaders around doing some of it in a formal way, some of it in a tangible way versus you do it your way, you do it your way, you do it your way, because then you don't get consistency.
Standardization.
And then there's challenges. He's like, well, my team, we do coffee, right? And okay, that's great, but is it an effective strategy for mental wellness and psychological safety and all those things, right? And are you encouraging togetherness versus isolation, right? And so some of those are where I see some of the gaps, right? So I remember the analogy about the socks.
Sock drawer.
Yeah, so I kind of have this exercise written out in my notebook around laundry day, right? Which would be a formalized opportunity that you can choose to participate or not, but it is a bit of that laundry day, you know, every 2 weeks, every month, every quarter, whatever, where the leader and maybe some support facilitate that discussion about unpacking the trauma from the last little bit, right? Like, let's write down on some stickies the last couple of really hard calls, right? They get kind of thrown in the middle, they get up on the board, and then we just kind of start seeing where the conversation goes, right? And just kind of encouraging that space where we're talking a bit more openly about, this call sucked and I didn't sleep for a week, but I'm okay now. But like, and just kind of encouraging that dialogue and making that expectation that if you want to work in what I think is a higher risk area for injury, this is part of the work.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be here if you don't do some of this work,
Totally.
because otherwise you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to make it in a way that, you know, your spouse and your kids are happy with, or yourself, right? Like, so some of those exercises, and then I really found the idea of intentional connection and functional disconnection really tangible, again, as something that, like, okay, these are terms, these are things that you should do. Sergeant, what are you doing to promote these tactics in your officers who are going to a difficult scene? Like, how are you encouraging functional disconnection and intentional reconnection, right? Like, and if you can't tell me, then that means I can help you create some strategies on ways to do that, on ways to encourage it and promote it, so that it becomes things that you do.
I love that so
and
much.
and it's so easy to get lost in not doing that stuff, because it's a homicide call and everybody's depending on you and you're rushing, and then there's a shooting and you got to run to that, and so you don't take those times to do that part, and then I think that's just kind of what adds up over time, right?
Completely.
And so I think intentionally being in that space of a senior leader, of being like, what are we doing as an organization with our part of the responsibility to make sure that we are minimizing some of this trauma where we can?
Absolutely. Oof, I
Take
love
time
all
for
of
your
that.
wellness, or you'll be forced to take time for your illness.
Well, you know what I've oftentimes reflected on is that in my graduate program, we had to do a year of our own therapy. Like, that was a requirement of our program, which makes tons of sense, right? Like, get to know yourself, get to know your patterns, have the experience of being a client, and, you know, like, all the things that come of that. But that made a ton of sense to me. I'm like, how can you possibly, like, if you are the instrument that's doing all of these things, you have to take care of it. So it's often made me wonder, like, in paramedicine and firefighting and police, like, that you folks don't get any of that training, right? Because what you're describing, coming together and being like, okay, let's just do a little review of the last couple of weeks. There's something so cathartic about that, and the universality of being able to say, like, we don't have to go into the details of what everybody remembered, but hey, like, how are we doing? What are people stuck with? What's on your minds? Like, I'm so impressed that you're promoting that. And I also think it's such a shame that we have to be intentional about promoting it, because it should just be part of what is, you know, given the fact that you folks and you know, and other paramedics, like, you are the instrument. You are going out there to do the thing. So of course you're going to be impacted by the things that are happening around you.
Yeah, I've often looked back at most of my training for primary care and advanced care, and here's a chapter in the book. It's called Critical Illness Management. You'll have a couple questions on the test, but we don't have time to go through it today. Let's go and do whatever skills, and it's no different from police officers. When you're learning your threat continuum and we're learning how to use your service weapon and non-lethal, those are skills that we train in, all of us do, but yet we don't train in the one skill that we need for the longevity of our careers, so that we don't impact our personal lives first and foremost, and our professional lives.
Yeah. And I think there are pockets of it. Like I said, those steps that we have taken, right? Like in recruit training, you get like an introduction, right? But in recruit training, you're just like, I don't care what I see. This is awesome. I'm in it for the long haul.
Totally.
I'm going to be ready for anything, right? So you're right. You're like, you're not in the frame of mind, right? And even though I think we do a really good job of debriefing critical incidences, like, for example, if there is like a child death, psych services is very quick to come in and support. But what we know, and what they've also, you know, communicate is, okay, well, maybe the week after is not the right time, or you're not connecting with people at the moment when they know that it's impacting them, right? And so the targeted approach has a place for sure, but this is more about the strategic regularity.
Totally.
Of it.
It sounds like it's just kind of cyclical, and it's just kind of happening, and it's just part of how people are. And that's the part that I'm just sort of underscoring, going like, that is so cool, right? Because then it's not categorical. You're either getting it or you're not. It's just part of how you do business, right?
Your SOPs.
Yeah. And
I'm
the
I'm not there yet.
Yeah. Okay.
But,
well, good for you. I support you in that try.
Because it's tough. It's tough to get there, and other things kind of, you know, get there, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the hope anyways.
So I've got a question for you. What do you think about a 10-year tenure in a unit like yours?
Oh, like, that's probably the most political question you could have asked me.
Feel free to comment if you'd like.
You can say, no, can't answer that
okay,
question.
you know what? I'll help you out. Let me put some context around it. I have really formulated a belief that we have enough data now that tells us that there are certain types of roles that are harder than others, right? So if you're going to be working with sexual exploitation or children or crime scenes or whatever. Like, we know that there's just more potential for trauma impact in certain, right? So I have really formed a belief of we should be reconstituting things so that people who go into those units, because they need people, have a mandatory year, and then they have to take a year away or 2 years or whatever, right? So that we're not putting people out there with this expectation that they should be able to sustain a decade and somehow not be injured or impacted by that.
Yeah. So I'll start with this, and then you can tell me if it satisfies
Okay.
your question.
Okay.
Because this is a tightrope, right? A little
Sure,
bit.
yeah.
And, I have a very passionate team that think tenure of 10 years is not long enough. The people that are in it, but then I have people that have left who are like, definitely need a tenure. And so they see it different context, right? So the balance that I've tried to strike right now as a compromise is I am trying to encourage members at the 4 or 5 year mark to go and do something else. For like 6 months, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, go take just a break, a small break to feel what it's like to sleep on a regular schedule for a little bit and see what comes up, right? Just experience what not doing this job day in and day out feels like for your body, for your family, and see what that feels like, right? In addition to that, we have part of the reset program that we have is every November is a small assessment period, right? So the folks are doing those 3 self-assessment questionnaires to see where they're at on the compassion, fatigue, all in the resiliency scores, just to kind of see where they're at. And then they do a quick little check-in with psych services to be like, hey, you're more elevated than you were last year on this frame, anything kind of going on. So a little bit of that check-in annually that I hope that they do. And then really what I've said to the members that are approaching tenure is this is how I feel about it. When you're at the 10-year mark, I want to know that you've consistently participated in the assessment programs so that I know that you are taking mental health seriously and caring for yourself. So that's check number 1. Check number 2 is their performance. If they're in the field and they're not doing their job, then that's just another sort of kind of red flag, right? And then 3 is their engagement with the unit. So if they're not mentoring, if they're not helping in programming, if they're not, so it's about engagement, their performance, and their own accountability around mental wellness. And if I can get 3 check marks on that, you get to stay a little longer. And then we kind of reassess. But if those 3 factors aren't there, I'm not allowing people to stay past their tenure. So I've been given a bit of flexibility to do that right now in the organization because things have been, kind of complicated in crime scenes. But there has been some buy-in and, okay, well, I guess that makes sense. Like, she'll let us stay as long as we're healthy and we're doing our job. That doesn't seem unreasonable to people.
Totally.
So, but it is really putting some of that responsibility on them to make sure they're taking care of themselves. And I don't get the results of that or anything, but it's just that piece of it's going to come through, right? If people aren't taking care of themselves, it starts to come through.
And you, in a very non-judgmental, very respectful, very uniformed way, have sort of operationalized what mental health checks should look like, right? Because the things that you're speaking to, reasonably we're going to anticipate would be the things that would fall off if somebody is struggling, right? But again, you've done it in a very sort of, non-threatening kind of a way. So it sort of requires an accountability without making it about do this or else kind of thing, right? Yeah. Nice. Did you come up with that?
Yes.
Oh.
Not by myself.
No, but that's awesome. Like, that's just, it's innovative and it's visionary and it's continuing to make lemonade out of the experiences maybe that you've had in your life and your career of going, these are some of the ways that we keep advancing how we're helping people.
Yeah, there was a really good group of folks that were really passionate about tenure, and they kind of came up with some framework to support, everybody just, they want longer tenure, but if we can't get there, here's some alternatives to consider. And so that was a really good approach. So.
Totally. I love it. Oh, wow. We should do that.
What's the tenure?
yeah, that's a good point. Oh, we got to come up with that first.
What's the metric?
Yeah.
What's next? What's next for you? Because it seems to me like you're really trying to figure out what that supports are for your unit and then standardizing some kind of, framework for the rest of your organization. So what's next for you?
And you seem energized by it.
Yeah.
I do love it. It's definitely enjoy digging into problems and trying to solution, and I'm passionate about this. So those make it fun for me. It's a little bit of a loaded question because, as you know, in CPS, at my level, we don't dictate where we go, right? I've already been here 4 years, and I've been able to stay that long because I have been so passionate about the work, because I was doing some heavy lifting, and rather than just create a bunch of chaos, I wanted to stay through and see it through. So will they allow me to stay much longer? I don't know. Would I like to? Yes, because I think we're only 4 years in, right? We only started this focus on psychological safety and wellness about 2 years ago. There's years to go before this becomes a standard practice in that unit. Yeah. So I would like to stay, but I don't know. So it's tough. I think, it's one of those things where, when I talked about being an R2MR trainer and then doing these other kind of pieces, those were all when I was in different roles in the organization. So it's almost like I try to find a way to gravitate towards something to do with mental wellness in each of my roles, but it's not really like an organizational framework. I would love to do something like that, but
what would be if you could rub the genie in the lamp and make that one wish, not for yourself, but for your organization or for just your fellow colleagues, what would that be? And I just came up with that question.
That's a tough one.
I know.
I think for me, I would want to find a way to create a space where dialogue could happen more safely. Because as we talked about, I haven't hidden it. I was a little nervous coming in, and it's hard to talk about things that are happening within your organization that are, complex and difficult. Sure. And then to talk about the personal impacts on you, or how, people might feel their organization is to blame for some of it. Those are hard spaces to be into, and there's a lot of trust and a lot of isolation and all that. So to be able to really kind of find a way to create a space where the blame and all of that could be just stripped away from it, and we can just really talk about the impact on people's functioning and then how to make that better. I would want that, because like literally yesterday, one of my sergeants came in and was talking about a lot of the challenges that she's a newly promoted leader, and she's talking about the challenges that she's having by just being, in her 40s and some of the things that come with being in your 40s. And she was like, where's the space to talk about how as a leader, like, this is difficult to do and I'm dealing with these medical impacts? And she was like, where is the space to talk about those kinds of things? And she's right. Like, there's still a lot of challenges to being able to be really open about what's harmed us and rebalancing that with like our values. So I think the organization would benefit so much from a space of being able to truly talk about not just operational trauma, but organizational trauma is I think the space where my heart lives right now is that organizational trauma, because I just think there's a lot of it, and we're not there yet.
No, and I think what I hear in that, or I guess what I reflect on, is like, I think people just get increasingly potentially isolated and therefore more alone the more they do become promotable, or in leadership positions, whatever. They don't necessarily have the same degree of contemporaries they once had, and there is a lot of sort of operational accountability, and I'm with you. I think it's like, we need a place for that. You need to be able to look at the budgets and the personnel and the schedules and all that kind of stuff. And we need the other, which is whether that's finding ways for people to feel like they can build up that tribe of contemporaries as they continue to advance in their career, or whether that's, leader to someone they may be mentoring, or but just ways to connect at this level, at the heart level.
And I think just like the body keeps the score, I think the organization eventually feels those impacts. And I'm not talking out of school by saying CPS is in the news a lot for culture and morale and things like that. And I think trauma, and I think what people are experiencing is part of that. So it's that seepage of, how people are feeling is impacting our ability to perform our mandate, because people are just struggling so much, right? Yeah.
And I think you've been able to articulate that. I think one thing that we try to do is not point fingers. Like, this has never been about assigning blame or pointing fingers. If we do talk about organizations, I've got my own organizational traumas, but I think what we can do in this space on the podcast is really kind of open it up to people's experiences and what their thoughts are on how to improve things and move through that space, so that in the future, and we're looking, crystal ball 5-10 years down the road, these aren't the conversations we're having anymore. And I think you've been able to articulate that so well because of what you wanted to do, and you've just made it happen.
Yeah. I like to kind of think of organizational trauma as like a marriage or like a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
It really gets you nowhere to like talk about blame or who did what to get to where we are. Like that's usually not how you resolve issues in a marriage. You get further by talking about the harm and moving past that, right? And so that's kind of like something that I've tried to kind of frame out is it's okay to talk about it, and it's actually how you move along, and it's a mature way to actually move things along and not then focus on the blame part.
Totally, and speak to the needs instead, right? Yeah, because then there's more you can do with something proactive, like I have a need for a future sort of change versus re-adjudicating of something that's already happened, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I heard someone say this a couple of years ago, and I can't remember who, so my apologies, whoever I'm about to rob from, but the idea that you can't have reconciliation until you have truth. And I think there's something about that in organizations, and my wish for organizations is that they could just drop the need to self-protect or organizational protect and say, yeah, like, there may be ways that we screwed up along the way, or there may be ways that we did things unintentionally that hurt people, whatever. Like, we're here to hear that. Like, we're here to acknowledge that and validate that. And can we find a way to move forward in a spirit of like learning from what's come before, so that we don't replicate it and we can move forward, right?
Yeah, and I mean, if we've learned anything from like the concepts of the healing circles and things like that, is sometimes all that's needed is just to be heard.
Totally.
Right? To just tell your version the way it felt to you and the way that it impacted you, and not have someone challenge it. Just hear it, right? And I think sometimes that would be a huge step forward.
I think so too. Yeah.
All the things that we can do in this little room with all of our guests, and wrap it up into a bow and offer it out.
Well, I mean, there's like, what do we have here? 60 years of collective experience? Like, that's got to stand for something.
Wow. Did you
probably more than that, actually.
You didn't take into account the years of age I am?
No, I'm going with experience. I'm going like post high school, right?
Yeah, I think it's well north of 50 years there, or 60.
Yeah. So we have something to say. We have something to offer. Yeah.
I'm sure, and I won't speak for Megan, but I am sure that we could sit here and talk for much longer. And I appreciate everything that you've said today. It's been an amazing experience to sit and listen to you and your hopes and wishes and the things that you've been doing. And I hope that anybody that's listening or watching on YouTube takes an opportunity to create their own change within their organization, even if it is just within a small unit, because I think change starts small, and then it can grow from there.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's a real gift that people offer when they choose to give of their time and their energy and their spirit and their wisdom to give to others. And you've done that in spades today. And a sign of a good podcast for me is that I know I'm going to think about it tonight and think about some of the things that you've shared and that wisdom that you've brought. So that's really, really a gift, and I appreciate it. And I'm so glad you hit send. Like,
so am I.
I mean, seriously, I feel like I could sit here and be schooled by you on any number of subjects. And whatever it took for you to go, yes, I want to talk to these people. I appreciate it.
And we'll thank John Gurloni.
Yeah, totally.
To say, hey, thanks for the interview. You just got somebody else to sign up to.
Yeah.
Well, it was either John or your like very clear cues and body language around management that we didn't get into, but I can still see in the room here today.
There's still some stuff.
That might have been there.
Yeah, there's still some stuff that I'm sure that I still probably should go talk to a therapist about. But
mine's busy. Yeah. So.
But I think that's important. I mean, I try to really kind of, in all of our conversations, not point fingers. And it's still a visceral experience at some point in time, and you feel it, and that's okay.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
At some point in time, I won't feel it anymore, but I can still look back and go, we can do something different. So thank you once again for coming in.
Thank you for having me. It was nice to be
Yeah,
here.
it was really nice to meet
Hopefully
you
it wasn't as intimidating as what you thought it was going to be.
No,
Good.
it's good for now.
It's good for now.
Well, everybody, that's Jennifer Lessard, our last guest, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Mental Health Mixtape, brought to you by the Before Operational Stress Program. We hope today's conversation has resonated with you and provided valuable insights into navigating the complexities of mental health. Remember, your well-being is our priority. If you or someone you know could benefit from the support and resources offered by the Before Operational Stress Program, don't hesitate to reach out. Take that first step towards a healthier, more resilient you. And here's a special treat for our dedicated listeners. A 15% discount waits for you when you sign up through the code provided in the show notes. Investing in your mental health has never been more accessible. We appreciate your continued support and commitment to breaking the stigma surrounding mental health. Let's keep the conversation going. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.